Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Poetry 1 course code 403. I'm your instructor for the course Poetry 1. Course code is English 403. My name is Bushra Ashraf. I did M English from NAMAL. It was a degree based on language, linguistics and literature. In the same year, after completing my masters, I joined NAMAL as a lecturer, and I joined NAMAL for doing MPhil in 2011, and at present my research work is in progress. Let's first have a course basics. The course is Poetry 1. The title of the course is Poetry 1. The course code is ENG 403, and the credit hours are 3. There is no lab or practical work as far as Poetry 1 is concerned, and in total there will be 32 lectures. Course description or overview. It will be a genre-based historical development of English literature. We will try to trace, we will study different poets from different ages, and it will include the poets from 14th century to the 18th century. So the course contents will include 5 major poets. Geoffrey Chaucer, who belonged to the 15th century or the medieval English literature. Then Edmund Spenser, who was an Elizabethan poet. John Milton, who was a Puritan poet. Alexander Pope, who was an 18th century poet or Augustan poet. Finally, John Donne, who is the most representative of the metaphysical poets. By analyzing the poems of these great poets from the history of English literature, we will find the connection between human imagination and words, because words and imagination and emotions, they are deeply connected, and they have got a relationship which is very close and very intimate relationship. This course offers some examples of the expression of personal feelings and ideas. The poems included in this selection can be studied as a refined commentary on the aesthetic concerns related to poetry and its types. The objective of the course is to understand and to critically appreciate different genres of poetry. Genres refers to the different types of poetry, because when we say poetry, there are different subject matters and themes of the poem, and in every era पोइट्स ने मुख्तलिफ तरीके से पोइट्री की है, इसीलिए हमें बहुत सी कंट्रोवर्सीज भी मिलती हैं कि पोइट्री बेसिकली है क्या. हर पोइट ने उसको अपने परसेप्शन के मुताबिक जो है वो डिफाइन किया है. इसी वजह से डिफरेंट जॉनरास ऑफ पोइट्री हैं, डिफरेंट टाइप्स हैं पोइट्री की, जिसमें कि एक पोइम इतनी छोटी भी हो सकती है जितनी कि सिर्फ 4 लाइंस या 10 लाइंस, और उसके मुकाबले में कोई पोइम जो है वो हो सकता है 800 या 1000 या 1400 लाइंस पर मुश्तमिल हो. तो it varies. So इस लिहाज से पोइट्री के different categories and different genres हैं. Another objective of the course is to analyze and compare poetic styles, themes, meanings of the lines and the linguistic and literary patterns of the poem. So these, when we read out the text, we highlight, we try to bring out the stylistic features of the poem of a particular writer has written. Then we discuss or we critically analyze the theme, that what is the subject matter and what is the theme of the poem. We are concerned with the meanings, and we analyze the linguistic and literary patterns, that what are the linguistic patterns, how the poet uses language in order to create certain effects in his lines. To analyze, another objective of the poetry is to analyze the feelings, reflections or moods conveyed in a poem through careful choice of words and phrases. This is the course overview. As we just discussed, that there are 5 major poets whose works, poetic works, will be focused in this course. So accordingly, I have prepared the course breakdown, that in lecture 1 there will be an introduction to the course, there will be an introduction to poetry. So in this lecture you will get an understanding how to analyze a poem and what are the constituent parts and what are the different types of poetry, what are the different categories of poetry, and what features have to be kept in mind for analyzing a piece of poetry. Then the second broader category, now after this there are 5 major categories. For the first lecture is based on the introduction. Now next, in lecture 2 to lecture 7, we will discuss the prologue to the Canterbury Tales, which is written by Geoffrey Chaucer. He was a poet of the 14th century. He has adopted a narrative and descriptive style of poetry, so it will give you an understanding of how to analyze a descriptive or a narrative piece of poetry. In lecture 2, we will briefly discuss the background to the age, the biography of the poet, his notable poetic works, and what type of works did he produce. So all this background will help us in analyzing, in forming a perspective about his poetry. Then in the subsequent lectures, we will discuss the text, we will analyze the lines of the text. Finally, towards the end of this session, after finishing with the analysis of the text, we will discuss the different perspectives, the different possible questions that can be asked in the examination. Then in lectures 8 to 14, it constitutes the second major part of our text. As I earlier said, that there are 5 parts, 5 major portions of this course. In the second part, we will discuss the Faerie Queene. It is a long poem which is written by Edmund Spenser. It is written in the form of allegory. We will discuss today, later on, that what is an allegory. So the Faerie Queene will introduce the concept of allegory. Once again, in the similar way, in lecture 8, we will discuss the age, the biography of the poet, because Edmund Spenser was an Elizabethan poet, so we will discuss the introduction to the age, to the Renaissance, to the which is also known as the Elizabethan age. So we will discuss the background of the age, what were the different factors that contributed to the rise of such political and social situations. Then we will discuss the life history of Edmund Spenser. We will discuss his literary career. So after this, from lecture 9 to 14, we will discuss the poem, the text of the poem first, and after finishing with the text of the poem, we will discuss the different perspectives from which we can analyze the different topics from which we can analyze the text of the Faerie Queene. One of the important aspect is allegory, as I just said. An allegory is a poem in which the poem has 2 layers of meanings. One is the apparent meaning and the other is the deeper meaning. From lecture 15 to 21, we will discuss Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost is a great poem. It is one of the greatest poem in the history of English literature, because it is unsurpassable, it is matchless. John Milton has created this character of Satan in Paradise Lost, which is uncomparable to the creation of any characters in English literature. It is written in the form of an epic. So by analyzing the Paradise Lost, we will be able to understand what is an epic, or what type of a poem is called an epic. In lecture 15, we will discuss the background to the age, since Milton was a Puritan writer, so we will have an introduction to the Puritan age. We will discuss the biography of the poet, his literary career, and what made him write Paradise Lost. Finally, in lecture 21, we will discuss the different topics from which we can analyze the text of Paradise Lost. And in the remaining lectures, from lectures 16 to 20, we will discuss and analyze the text of Paradise Lost. Next, in lectures 22 to 26, we will discuss the love songs and holy sonnets of John Donne. John Donne, it is a metaphysical poet. So the analysis of the love songs of John Donne will familiarize you to the metaphysical poetry and the other perspective of his poetry, like holy sonnets also. So in lecture 22, we will discuss the metaphysical school of thought, the important characteristics of this school of thought, the biography of the poet John Donne, and his important works. In lectures 23 3 to 26, we will analyze the love songs and holy sonnets. We will look at the different themes that have been used in those, that have been focused in these love songs, and what are the different elements that make these poems as metaphysical poetry. Finally, in lecture 27 to 32, we will analyze the text of the Rape of the Lock, which is written by Alexander Pope. Alexander Pope was a writer of 18th century. So we will discuss the text of the Rape of the Lock, since he was an Augustan writer. In lecture 27, we will discuss the different social, political and religious situation of the 18th century. We will discuss the important writers of the age, the biography of the poet will be discussed, his important works will be discussed, and finally the text of the Rape of the Lock will be discussed in lectures 28 to 31. Finally, in lecture 32, we will discuss the important aspects or the questions that can be based on the poem The Rape of the Lock. The Rape of the Lock is essentially a mock epic, so we will analyze it from this perspective, and there are certain others also that we will discuss in lecture 32, which will be the last lecture. As far as the grading criteria is concerned, this is the criteria. Quizzes carry 10% marks, assignments carry 10% marks, graded discussions carry 5% marks, midterm exam carries 25% marks, and final examination carries 50% marks. Now let's have an introduction to the subject itself before starting off with the poetry of different poets. First, let's have a look at what is poetry and how can we analyze poetry. Different writers try to explain, try to interpret poetry in different ways. We will have a look at some of these definitions of poetry for our understanding, to see what basically is poetry, or when we say poetry, how is it different from prose, or how is it different from any ordinary piece of writing. Aristotle in his book on Poetics defined poetry as he says that the distinction or the difference between a historian and a poet is not only the difference that one is writing in prose and the other is writing in verse, because prose or verse mein jo fark hai, prose is the simple arrangement of words, just make a subject, verb and object use होता है, लेकिन poetry में ये sequence follow नहीं होता है. Poetry में the poet can rearrange the words to suit his own needs. He might start a sentence with a preposition or he might start it with a verb, तो so उसमें कोई particular word order या word arrangement of words नहीं होता है. So verse is dependent on the meaning, on the theme, and it is largely based on the discretion of the poet. उसकी मर्जी पर मुनहसर है कि वो किस तरीके से क्या effect convey करना चाह रहे हैं. Moreover, then it says that it is not that difference then the one is writing in prose and the other is writing in verse. The one describes the thing that has been, so historian writes about something that has taken place, and the other a kind of thing that might be. So in poetry, the poets describe the possibility in future. They describe something that they want to see in the society. Hence poetry is something more philosophic and of graver import than history. So Aristotle, he is of the point of view that in this way poetry is more serious, more philosophic in nature as compared to prose, because poetry discusses the things that might happen. There is probability of that thing that it might occur in this way, but as compared to history, because history states something as it happened in the past, since its statements are of the nature rather of universals, whereas those of history are singulars. So in history it represents a particular geography or a region, but in the case of poetry the subject matter is universal. It can be applied to any society, it can be applied to any geographical region. So this was the definition of poetry by Aristotle in his book on Poetics. Then Samuel Johnson defines poetry as poetry is the art of uniting pleasure with truth. So he says that this is happiness and truth. सच को और हैप्पीनेस को दोनों को कंबाइन कर दिया जाए तो दैट इज कॉल्ड पोइट्री. Then William Wordsworth, whose definition has been appreciated and it has been acknowledged and it's often quoted by a number of people all over the world, he said poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings It takes its origin from emotions recollected in tranquility. William Wordsworth defined poetry in lyrical ballads in 1802. So for Wordsworth, poetry is something that comes directly from heart, that reflects your powerful feelings. कि आपकी सिर्फ feelings का इजहार होता है. Poetry वो है जो आपके जो भी इमोशंस, जो भी फीलिंग्स आपके माइंड में आए, आपने किसी चीज़ को एक्सपीरियंस किया, किसी जगह को विजिट किया, उसके बाद जो फीलिंग्स, जो इमोशंस आपके जहन में आते हैं, अगर आप उसको वर्ड्स की फॉर्म दे दो, दैट इज कॉल्ड पोइट्री. सो हिज पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू वाज क्वाइट डिफरेंट एज कंपेयर टू अदर्स, एंड इट इज ऑफन कोटेड बाय पीपल दैट it reflects your imagination, it reflects your thinking, where your emotions are also involved. Samuel Taylor Coleridge defines poetry as the best words in the best order. Now for him, he has used different words. He says that it is the choice of best words, and those best words are put together in best order. So the arrangement and the choice, for him, poetry consists of choosing best words and then putting them together in best order. Shelley describes poetry as, he defines poetry as, poetry is the record of the best and happiest moments of the happiest and best minds. So Shelley says that when people are happy in their happiest moments, when they write something, it is called poetry. So roughly speaking, we might say that poetry may be defined as literary work in which special intensity is given to the expression of feelings and ideas by the use of distinctive style and rhythm. So if we analyze this definition of poetry, we find that it is the expression of feelings and ideas, जो आपके emotion से related है, आपकी feeling से related है. So the prime and the foremost thing, important thing in this definition of poetry is that your feelings and ideas are important. Moreover, it has a different style, a style which is different from ordinary sentences, and in this different style, in this distinctive style, it carries rhythm. So this was the definition of poetry. Now one important point when we start discussing poetry is that poetic license. After getting familiarity with what is poetry, it is important to know that there is liberty for the poets to use language the way it suits their purpose of rhyme and rhythm. Because the language and the word order in the language, the way it is used in poetry, it is different from ordinary language. It is different from the diction and the word order of the prose. So poets arrange the words in a way that suits their purpose of rhythm and rhyme. So they have the liberty to use the language in extraordinary way. They can use for example, they can use a word which is a noun as verb. So in order to create certain effects. So poets have got the poetic license. So this is known as this liberty or this freedom of using the language that suits their purpose of rhythm and rhyme is called as poetic license. For example, Shakespeare in his play, he used the word boy as a verb. So ordinarily if we look at the word boy जो है वो किसी noun को refer करता है, लेकिन poets को ये liberty होती है कि वो किसी भी वर्ड को डिस्टॉर्ट करके इस तरीके से यूज करें कि जो उनके मीनिंग पे या उनकी थीम को सूट करे या उनके रिदम और राइम के पर्पस को, किसी भी पर्पस के लिए दे कैन यूज दिस लिबर्टी एंड दे कैन यूज द लैंग्वेज इन अ वे दैट सूट्स देयर पर्पस, जो कि उनके पर्पस को फुलफिल करे, उनके मकसद के हसूल के लिए उनको जिस तरह के वर्ड्स की ज़रूरत हो वो उस तरीके से लैंग्वेज को, उस तरीके से वर्ड्स को यूज़ कर सकते हैं. सो दिस लिबर्टी, ये जो आज़ादी है पोइट्स को हासिल है, इसको पोइटिक लाइसेंस कहते हैं. देन coming to the categories of poetry, there are different categories of poetry. The poetry can be descriptive, it may be reflective, it may be narrative. Let's discuss them one by one. The descriptive poetry is the one that describes the things, that describes the scenes. This descriptive poems are centered around the object of interest and they serve a didactic purpose. Descriptive poems compel the readers to visualize the object, place or person of interest as pictured by the poet himself. So the poet gives such clear and vivid descriptions. ایسی descriptions poet دیتا ہے کہ descriptive poetry میں readers can actually imagine the scene. وہ scene کو یا character کو جو بھی چیز وہ describe کر رہا ہوتا ہے اتنی اس کی description strong ہوتی ہے کہ readers actually imagine the things in their mind. words اور adjectives اس طرح سے یوز کیے جاتے ہیں کہ اس کی ایک clear picture form ہو جاتی ہے readers کے mind میں. The second category of poetry is reflective poetry. Reflective poems contain some explicit or implicit generalization about life by the poet. Simply put, it is a mere reflection of the state of mind of the poet put forth in a poetic manner. So whatever the poet perceives about the society or about a situation, he might put it on a paper. It would be known as reflective poetry. So that mood or that thinking process in which he puts together his thoughts on a paper is known as reflective poetry. Next category of poetry is narrative poetry. As from the very name, it describes that it is the narration. It is based on the narration, and narration can be of any incident or a battle or a scene. So the poet narrates a story. The poet narrates a story through the use of poetic diction. It is considered to be one of the oldest form of poetry, and it often focuses on the pros and cons of life. So the poet might narrate some incident, might narrate the story of a battle, might narrate some other incident that took place, or some imaginary incident might be described. So the poetry may be narrative in nature, in which the poet narrates a story. There are different types of poetry. There is lyric poetry, ballad, sonnet, ode, elegy, and epic. Let's discuss them briefly one by one. A lyric is a short poem which has the characteristics of a song. It pertains to a single mood or feeling. اس میں ایک ہی feeling یا ایک ہی mood کو focus کیا جاتا ہے and is more personal in nature. So lyric poetry جو ہے وہ اس میں poet جو ہے کسی ایک particular mood پہ بیس کر کے poem جب لکھتا ہے, اپنی feelings لکھتا ہے کسی ایک situation کے بارے میں, that is known as lyric poetry. Ballad. A ballad is a type of a narrative poem which deals with a heroic theme. A ballad has musical quality. It has a set theme and fixed metrical form. So ballad میں ایک fixed theme اور ایک fixed metrical form ہے, اور یہ اس کی theme جو ہے وہ heroic ہے, اور ballad کی theme heroic ہے. Next is sonnet. A sonnet is a relatively short poem consisting of merely 14 lines. It is known to follow a strict pattern of rhyme. So the rhyme scheme, it follows a certain pattern of rhyme scheme. So sonnet consists of 14 lines only. It is a short poem, and these 14 lines can be further divided into two parts, an octave and a sestet, and this separation marks the end or the break in thought, or it refers to the climax also. There are three types of sonnets: Petrarchan sonnet, Shakespearean sonnet, and Spenserian sonnet. Petrarchan sonnet, since Petrarch was an Italian writer, so this Petrarchan sonnet is also known as Italian sonnet. Shakespearean sonnet is also known as English sonnet. Finally, we have Spenserian sonnet. So in all these types of sonnets, the basic format of the poem remains the same, that it consists of 14 lines, and these 14 lines can be divided into two parts, octave and sestet. Octave consists of first 8 lines, and the sestet consists of last 6 lines. But there comes a difference in the rhyme scheme patterns, that on the basis of which it can be divided into 3 types as Petrarchan sonnet, Shakespearean sonnet, and Spenserian sonnet. Ode. This is another type of poem. This type of poem is a direct address to a particular person or thing. It is relatively elaborate in its structure. It is divided into 3 parts: the strophe, antistrophe, and the epode. Odes have a serious overtone with the strophe and the antistrophe looking at the subject from conflicting perspectives, while the epode tries to resolve the underlying issues. For example, there are a number of odes written by different writers in English literature. We find ode to the west wind. There is ode to the intimations of immortality, which is written by Wordsworth. So in ode, the poet addresses a person or a thing. Sometimes the poets address the non-living things also. For example, Ode to the West Wind or Ode to Melancholy, they address something, the poets address something which is either abstract or a non-living thing. The next type is epic. An epic is a long narrative poem about a hero containing the following elements. An epic contains a theme, an invocation to the muse, battles, romance, supernatural elements, journeys, descent to the underworld, and the epic similes. So the epic is usually of national significance, and the hero of the epic is, also has the national importance. Now, whenever we have a piece of poetry and we have to analyze a poem, there are certain steps that have to be kept in mind. First, we are concerned with the critical appreciation of the poem, that what is the theme or what is the subject matter, the subject matter of the poem. The linguistic analysis, the language, the way the language has been used by the poet, because poets use words very carefully and they put them together in order to create certain effects. We will discuss this linguistic analysis, that what are the different things that can be pointed out while analyzing the linguistic characteristics of a piece of poetry. Finally, on the basis of, by mixing up the two together, the critical appreciation or the main contents of the poem with the linguistic analysis, with the use of those literary figures of speech, by combining these two elements together, we can give a conclusion to the poem. When we give the critical appreciation of a poem, we include two things here: the content matter and the theme, the subject matter of the poem and the theme that is dealt with in that particular poem. As far as the linguistic analysis is concerned, in linguistic analysis, the use of language and the choice of vocabulary is very important, because it varies from poet to poet. In different eras, there has been different bent of mind, and different writers were of the view of different views in the use of language, because some writers, they preferred using easy language, the ordinary commonplace language, while on the other hand there were writers who used very difficult and very complex language, for which we need to open up dictionary, and we cannot read even 2 lines without opening up the dictionary. For next, there is the use of figures of speech, not only the ordinary language, then there are figures of speech also, and the use of figures of speech is very important, because these figures of speech, they create certain effects, and the poets, in order to get certain specific purpose, they use the language that suits their theme, the subject matter of the poem. Here I have divided the figures of speech into 2 parts. The first part consists of metaphor, simile, personification, metonymy, apostrophe, hyperbole, understatement, litotes, and transferred epithet. These are some of the figures of speech. When there will be certain others that will be used, these are not all. We'll be discussing them when we will analyze the text. But before starting off actually with poetry, with the analysis of poetry, the readers or the students must know some figures of speech. They must have some background of these figures of speech in order to be able to understand how to analyze poetry. As far as metaphor is concerned, metaphor is a type of comparison in which 2 things are directly linked together. For example, love is a rose, but you better not pick it. So love is directly compared to rose. For example, if I say John is lion, now that does not mean that John has become lion. Lion has got certain characteristics, certain qualities, and what is the most prominent quality? That is the strength, the power of lion. So that is attributed to John. When I say he is a lion, that means I am referring to the qualities that are common in both. Lion is strong, powerful, so that means I am attributing that quality of lion to John. Similarly, let's take another example. She is a rose. Now that does not mean that the girl is a rose. This refers that the delicacy and the beauty of the flower is represented by that lady or by that female. So the characteristic feature of the flower, which is beauty, which is its delicacy, is attributed to that lady. So in metaphor we compare the two things directly, اور اس کو اردو میں استعارہ کہتے ہیں. Simile, in simile we make an indirect comparison. Now by indirect I want to say that comparison is made with the help of the word as and like. The word as and like is used in order to state the comparison. For example, my love is like a red rose that's newly sprung in June. Now my love is like a red rose. Now like a red rose, here it is the indirect comparison. The person is comparing love with the help of the word like. So the speaker has made an indirect comparison of his love to the red rose. Similarly, when we say she is beautiful as the moon, so she is beautiful as the moon, I am making an indirect comparison by using the word as. Or if I say John is as brave as a lion, so I am making an indirect comparison of the strength of both the lion and John. So this is indirect comparison. In metaphor and simile both we make comparison, but in metaphor the comparison is direct, but in the case of simile the comparison is indirect, and we use the words as and like. Metonymy. Metonymy makes associations or substitutions. For example, the place name Hollywood has become a metonym for the American film industry. Similarly, Bollywood has become for the Indian film industry and Lollywood for the Pakistani film industry. So these are the metonyms. Next we have personification. In personification, the characteristics or the qualities of living beings are attributed to something non-human, to some abstract thing or to some non-living thing. For example, in the short story The Last Leaf, the writer refers to the winter season as his icy hands. Now winter season is not a human being having hands, so winter is personified in that story. Similarly, there are other examples. Kawal, it's what happy tastes like. Now kawal is an ice cream, so ice cream cannot taste, or happy taste, this is personification. Moreover, Acer, there is an ad, we hear you. So Acer are the computers, they are not human beings, so how can Acers hear? They are computers. So this is personification, when the qualities of living beings or the qualities of human beings are given to the non-living things. جب ہم کسی انسان کی جو qualities ہیں اگر ہم وہ ایسی چیز کو دے دیں جو abstract ہو یا non-living ہو, this is called personification. The next figure of speech is apostrophe. Apostrophe not only animates something absent or non-living but also addresses it directly. تو اپوسٹرفی میں کیا ہوتا ہے کہ اس کو ایڈریس کیا جاتا ہے, جیسے کہ کوئی انسان سامنے موجود ہو اور آپ اس کو مخاطب کرتے ہیں. اسی طریقے سے پوئٹس یہ فگر آف سپیچ ہے جس میں کہ نان لیونگ چیز کو نہ صرف یہ کہ پرسونیفیکیشن میں تو ہم اس کو صرف لیونگ بینگز کی کوالٹیز دیتے ہیں, لیکن اپوسٹرفی میں ہم اس کو پہلے تو اینیمیٹ کرتے ہیں, ہم اس کو ایز ہیومن بینگ ٹریٹ کرتے ہیں اور اس کے بعد اس کو ایڈریس بھی کیا جاتا ہے. فار انسٹنس ان جانی مرسز سانگ Moon River, the river is apostrophized. Wherever you are going, I am going your way. So you are going. Here the writer is addressing the river, and first he has made it a human being. He has given it the quality of a human being that it is going somewhere, and then he is addressing it. Similarly, in Ode to the West Wind, Shelley addresses the wind, and he says, "Oh west wind." So this is again the use of the figure of speech apostrophe. In apostrophe, we not only give the qualities of human beings to non-living or abstract things, we also address them. So addressing a non-living or inanimate thing is called apostrophe. So this is another figure of speech. The next figure of speech is hyperbole. hyperbole exaggerates the truth for emphasis. تو اس میں اپنے پوائنٹ آف ویو کو فوکس کرنے کے لیے پوئٹ بات کو بڑھا چڑھا کر بتاتے ہیں. تھوڑی سی سچائی ہوتی ہے, مطلب حقیقت ہوتی ہے اس میں, لیکن اس کو بہت بڑھا چڑھا کر بیان کیا جاتا ہے. فار ایگزامپل, ٹو سے دیٹ انکل ویزر از اولڈر دین ڈرٹ is an example of hyperbole. So older than dirt was first that was created, so we cannot say that somebody is older than dirt. This is the example of hyperbole. So here, in order to refer to the old age of the person, of the uncle, the person says he is older than dirt. So this is the example of hyperbole, because you are exaggerating the truth. کہ ٹھیک ہے وہ بوڑھے ہیں یا پرانے ہیں, لیکن اتنے پرانے بھی نہیں ہیں کہ وہ صدیوں سے ہیں. So in hyperbole, the poets exaggerate the truth. وہ سچائی کو بڑھا چڑھا کر بیان کرتے ہیں. The next figure of speech is understatement. Understatement says less and means more. To say that he is a bit long in the tooth is probably an understatement. جس طرح سے ہائپربلی میں ایک چھوٹی سی بات کو بڑھا چڑھا کر بیان کیا جاتا ہے, اس میں ایگزیجریٹ کیا جاتا ہے, انڈرسٹیٹمنٹ از دی اپوزٹ آف ہائپربلی. اس میں جو بات ہوتی ہے اس کو کم بیان کیا جاتا ہے, اس میں کم کہہ کے اس کا مقصد زیادہ کو ریفر کرنا ہوتا ہے. سو ہائپربلی اینڈ انڈرسٹیٹمنٹ آر دی اپوزٹ آف ایچ ادر. نیکسٹ وی ہیو لائٹوٹیز. Litotes is a type of understatement in which an affirmative is expressed by negating its opposite. یہ بھی انڈرسٹیٹمنٹ کی ایک فارم ہے جس میں کہ ہم نیگیٹو یوز کرتے ہیں in order to say the positive thing. For example, he is not as young as he used to be. So instead of saying that the person is old, we say he is not as young as he used to be. So we mean the affirmative sentence by stating the negative of its opposite. The next figure of speech is transferred epithet. When the feelings of the speaker are transferred to the atmosphere or the non-living or abstract things, it is called transferred epithet. For example, the weary night. Now, night cannot be weary, night cannot be tired or exhausted. So, when the feelings of the people are transferred into the objects of the world or to the non-living things, it is called transferred epithet. This is the second category of figures of speech. In the second category, alliteration, assonance, consonance, onomatopoeia, anaphora, antithesis, paradox and oxymoron are included. Alliteration refers to the repetition of an initial consonant sound. For example, a peck of pickled peppers. This is the example of alliterative verse because here per sound is repeated. So in the case of this second category of figures of speech, we do not refer to the letters of alphabets or spellings, we refer to the sounds. So the sounds are repeated. So in this case, letters of alphabets or spellings are not important. They might not be same, but the sounds are same. The first example of alliteration is a peck of pickled pepper. In 3 of the words, per sound is repeated. Then one very common example is Monday morning. Both the words begin with M. Then the last example is how high His Highness holds his haughty head. Now, this is a perfect example of alliteration in which all the words begin with H sound. It is not necessary to write the whole line beginning with the same letters of alphabets. If 2 or more words they begin with the same letter of alphabet, it is called alliteration. But there are certain examples in which we find lines and lines written with the same letters of alphabet. So this is the one of the perfect example of alliterative verse. The next figure of speech is assonance. Assonance refers to the repetition of similar vowel sounds in neighboring words. It is also known as internal rhyming. For example, do you like blue? Now, do, you and blue. In 3 of these words, the vowel sounds in the middle, they rhyme together. Similarly, in the first example, it beats as it sweeps as it cleans. So beats and weeps and cleans. In 3 of these words, the letters of alphabets are not same. In the first one, it is EA, then double E and then EA. but the sound that comes from these words, these sets of letters of alphabets, they are same. So this is the example of assonance. The next figure of speech is consonance. Consonance is a poetic device characterized by the repetition of the same consonant in successive words. For example, all mammals named Sam are clammy. Now, consonance refers to the repetition of the same consonant sound in the middle of words or at the end of words. On the other hand, alliteration refers to the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning only. So here the words like mammals named Sam, so M in the middle and at the end of the word Sam, this is the example of consonance. Onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia refers to the words that imitate the sounds associated with the objects or actions they refer to. वो words जिनकी sound, जिनको अदा करना ही उनकी meaning हो, the moment we have the word, हमें उसका मतलब समझ आ जाए, उसकी sound को भी represent कर रहा हो, these words are called onomatopoeia. For example, when we say quack quack, we instantly understand we are talking about the sound of the ducks. Similarly, when we say bring, so this is what type of sound we get? The alarm clock. An alarm clock clanged in the dark and silent room. Similarly, we have another example. Chuck chuck chuck, puff puff puff, ding dong ding dong. The little train rumbled over the track. Now see, if you say it in a very melodious and fluent manner, instantly the other person understands that you are talking about the train, the sound of a train. So such words that whose sound is the meaning, or the moment you say them and it describes its meaning, those words are called onomatopoeia. The next figure of speech is anaphora. Anaphora refers to the repetition at the beginning of successive clauses. When there are a number of clauses and most of the clauses have the same beginning, it is an example of anaphora. For example, I needed a drink, I needed a lot of life insurance, I needed a vacation, I needed a home in the country, what I had was a coat, a hat and a gun. Now the first four clauses, they use the word I needed a. So this is the repetition of the beginning in the successive clauses. So this is the perfect example of anaphora. In the similar way, the speech of Martin Luther King that he made, the very famous speech, that also contains elements of anaphora in it. The next figure of speech is antithesis. In an antithesis, contrasting ideas are juxtaposed in balanced phrases or clauses. For example, love is an ideal thing, marriage a real thing. Antithesis में दो clauses में या दो phrases में contrasting ideas होते हैं. But these contrasting ideas, they're usually true. Like love is an ideal thing. Definitely the people who love, they live in their own imaginary world. Marriage a real thing. So on the other hand, the reality is something else. The next figure of speech is paradox. A paradoxical statement appears to contradict itself, but it is seen that the paradoxical statement, deep down it is true. If you wish to preserve your secret, wrap it up in frankness. Or child is the father of man. Now apparently if we look at this sentence, this statement, child is the father of man. How comes that child can be the father of man? But the way Wordsworth has described it, he has said that when the child comes to this earth, he has all the knowledge, and gradually the heavenly light that surrounds the child, that fades away, and he loses that knowledge, and he tends to forget all the things that he earlier knew when he came to this world. So in this sense, if we look at it, it is true that child is the father of man. So a paradoxical statement contradicts itself. Oxymoron, the next figure of speech is oxymoron. An oxymoron is a compressed paradox. An oxymoron is a compressed paradox in which incongruous or contradictory terms appear side by side. Now, ہم اپنی عام روٹین لائف میں بھی اکثر ہم جب بولتے ہیں تو ہم بہت سارے آکسیمورونز یوز کرتے ہیں, بٹ وی نیور ٹیک کیئر آف دیز تھنگس. بٹ دس از اے فگر آف اسپیچ particularly used by the poets in order to enhance the literary effect of their writing. An open secret, the two words are opposite, open and secret. Then act naturally. When you are acting, that means it is artificial, it is not natural. But when we say act naturally, this is the example of oxymoron, and it is often used in everyday life. Then random order. You say that I have put the things in the random order, or I have these things are lying in the random order. So random and order is something in the deliberately done, and random is without any order. So again, two contradictory words are put together. Then the word, the phrase original copy. We often say that we have to submit the original copy on the office. Now original, when something is original, that means it is new, it is all original. Copy means duplicate. So original copy, when these two words are put together, that means this is the use of oxymoron, because two contradictory words are put together, and we often use these in our ordinary speech also, but usually we are not aware of the extent, we are not aware of the way we are using these words. Let's have a review of lecture 1. Initially we discussed, we had an elaborate introduction of the course, that the different poets that we are going to study. We discussed that we will discuss the prologue to the Canterbury Tales written by Geoffrey Chaucer. Then the second poet that we will discuss is Edmund Spenser, and his poem we will study is The Fairy Queen. Then we will study Paradise Lost by John Milton. Then we will study the love songs and holy sonnets by John Donne. Finally we discussed that we will study The Rape of the Lock written by Alexander Pope. After this we had an elaborate introduction to the subject, which is poetry. We discussed some of the definitions of poetry by different poets, as we discussed that in every age different writers, they explained it differently, and this is the reason that there are different types of poetry and there are different genres of poetry. Broadly speaking, poetry is divided into three categories: narrative poetry, reflective poetry, and descriptive poetry. Then we discussed the different types of poetry. The poetry may be written in the form of an epic, a sonnet, elegy, lyric poem. So there are all these different types of poetry. Then for the analysis of poetry, we discussed that there are certain things that have to be kept in mind: the literary appreciation of the poem, the linguistic analysis, and finally, in order to combine these two together, we get the actual essence of the poetic lines. Then we discussed the figures of speech. There are a number of figures of speech. Metaphor refers to the direct comparison. Then simile refers to the indirect comparison, because in this we use the words as and like. Then we discussed personification. When we attribute the qualities of living beings to non-living things, this is called personification. Then apostrophe. In apostrophe we attribute the qualities of living being to non-living things, and then the poets address those things. For example, in O West Wind, now the poet is addressing west wind, so this is the use of apostrophe. Similarly, there are certain other figures of speech also, like transferred epithet. In transferred epithet, the feelings of the person are attributed to the place, to the environment. For example, when we say weary night or drowsy sky, now sky is not drowsy, but this is the person who is feeling drowsy, and it seems to him that everything is weary or exhausted or drowsy. So this is known as transferred epithet. Then we discussed the second category of figures of speech. In second category, we discussed the different ways in which poets use the sounds of the language in order to convey certain effects. The most important ones that we discussed are alliteration. In alliteration, the initial consonant sounds are repeated together. For example, the words like Monday morning, the m sound of both the words is same, so this is the use of alliteration. Similarly, another famous example is how high His Highness holds his haughty head. So this is another example of alliteration. Similarly, we had the examples of assonance and consonance, which refers to the repetition of consonant sounds and the vowel sounds respectively. Then we discussed oxymoron. Oxymoron refers to the use of putting together the opposite words. For example, open secret, original copy, random order. So these are the examples of oxymoron. We discussed the use of paradox. Paradoxical statements are contradictory in themselves. For example, child is the father of man. Now the statement is itself contradictory. Within the same statement there is a contradiction. Then we discussed antithesis. In antithesis, there are phrases or clauses that contain opposite ideas. For example, love is an ideal thing, marriage a real thing. So these are the uses of different figures of speech that can be analyzed or that can be highlighted in the while analyzing poetry, because these convey certain effects, and in order to produce certain effects, poets use these figures of speech in their poetry. In today's lecture, I have given the introduction of poetry, the broad categories, and I have discussed some of the figures of speech. It is not possible here to give or to mention all the figures of speech. So when we will be discussing text, there might be some other figures of speech also, or they might be looked at from the dictionary of literary terms. I have given some important ones that are very common, that are very famous, so that you have some background idea that how language can be utilized and what type of figures of speech can be there. In the next lecture, we will discuss Geoffrey Chaucer. We will actually start with the contents of the course. The first poet is Geoffrey Chaucer. He was a 14th century poet. In lecture 2, we will have an introduction to the 14th century, the background of the age. We will discuss certain political, social and religious conditions of the society. We will discuss the biography of the poet and his important works, and what made him write or what was the original plan for writing the prologue to the Canterbury Tales. So this is all for lecture 1. Allah Hafiz.